Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about the Tomb King Legendary Lords in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Talking about the worst, talking about the best, their campaign situations, dynamics, as well as faction effects and skill lines. Starting at number 4, we have Grand Hierophant Khatep. Now, Khatep, I think, has the worst campaign of all of the Tomb Kings in the game. But he also kind of has the easiest campaign to deal with at the same time. He certainly has a lot of power, but just because you have a lot of power does not necessarily make a campaign good. So, looking at the situation he starts in the Red Desert, he has a tier 2 settlement already, he starts with a tier 1 barracks, he's a war of greenskins, very easy to deal with, very easy to manage. And he also has a Lich Priest of Light, and Light Magic is actually pretty good right now. That, and his starting army will allow him to easily defeat these greenskins and then do whatever you want. One of the chief advantages of Khatep's campaign starting position is that while plenty of factions don't particularly like you, they don't especially hate you either, and they hate other people around them far more. So you're in a relatively safe position from that perspective, being able to do a lot of the things that you want. There are, however, certain issues with this campaign. You get Winds of Magic benefit, character experience, pretty powerful. Mortuary Cult, crafting cost, minus 20%. So minus 20% on crafting various things over here can be useful, can save you a lot of canopic jars in the long run. Climate-wise, you've got wasteland and mountains, as well as desert and savanna, which makes sense. Mountains, not especially great, because you don't have a good way of navigating the mountains, but there are some of them around you. Unfortunately, the problem is there's also plenty of climate around you that is not ideal for you to deal with, and that is one of the bigger issues that Khatep does have to deal with in his campaign. Skill line wise, he gets 10% campaign movement range, chance of Winds of Magic increasing, plus 50%, when changing, plus 50%, and magical attacks for his entire army, which is pretty solid as far as benefits go. But on top of that, he also gets a Casket of Souls as a mount at level 18. That's a very, very powerful artillery piece. He has a Sandstorm ability. He is a caster lord, so he gets ability uses for Sandstorm Vortex ability. That is pretty strong, pretty solid as far as abilities go. And then he gets a whole bunch of benefits for Nehekara warriors and even Tomb Guard units in terms of leadership. Right there, he gets perfect vigor himself, he gets melee attack, leadership for certain units. He gets Tomb Protector, which gives him a bit of Tomb Guard capacity, not as much, but he also gets formed attack for all, a formation attack for all Tomb Guard units. Not necessarily the best benefit, because formation does leave some things to be desired. I think it actually reduces combat effectiveness in a lot of ways, but very importantly, you get plus 3 hero capacity for Lich Priests, and that is very significant, as well as Mastery of Elemental Winds for all Lich Priests. Then you get Mortuary Cult, which is ridiculous, because it's like Lich Priest recruitment in all provinces. I think they're going to fix that they've mentioned that they're going to improve certain things, but yeah. You can recruit heroes by default in any province's Tomb Kings, so this is a bit redundant. But still, more hero capacity, canopic jars post-battle, construction cost minus 5%, so there's a lot of good benefits in this campaign. But why is it at the bottom? 2 reasons: victory conditions and Books of Nagash. You don't need to get the Books of Nagash to win a campaign, but the problem is, at least at the moment, and hopefully that is going to change, you have no way of gaining the Books of Nagash through diplomacy. So you're forced to pick a fight with Mazdamundi and Morathi to get these 2 books that are in their locations. Also White Tower of Hoeth, all that kind of stuff, and Bretonnia. So not the best campaign dynamic, not the best positioning of books, and it is first rank. Because for instance, if I'm playing a Khatep campaign, you know what I'll do? I'll just go take Marafi City without declaring war along the way. I'll just march an army over there, take it out, sell it back to Marafi. She probably would accept it for peace agreement. Same with Mazdamundi. It just works. Not a great campaign dynamic. Again, just lots of rubbish from my perspective on that subject. The bigger issue, and what I think does degrade this campaign, is you have to take all of Nehekhara and build those landmarks. You're the furthest away. You have no easy way of getting there. You can go either through the east, cross the sea, all that, or you can come in, take a western side approach. Basically, use a sea lane, you get into Cathay, you go through Cathay, Darklands, etc., and that's how you get to Khemri. Still, it is annoying, and it doesn't even make sense from a lore perspective because it forces you to fight Settra, which Khatep would never do in the lore. He's the one that brought Settra back. He was very, very loyal to Settra in the lore, to really almost a fanatical level. Loyal to Khemri, loyal to Nehekhara as a whole, loyal to Settra. So it just is a weird campaign. The dynamics of it don't necessarily work. I think he needs a better way of getting back to Khemri, or an improvement in climate, better victory conditions, books, the handling of books, and so on and so forth. Powerful Lord. Undeniably so. Really powerful, really easy campaign, but all the same, not the best dynamics to deal with. At number 3, we have High Queen Khalida, who starts with a minor settlement, and that is, as far as I see it, a downside, especially because she starts facing an army to the south, but what she really wants to do is get Lamia as quickly as possible, because there's another Vampire Count's army right there. If you let them recruit a lot of units, you'll be swarmed. So just a weird dynamic to be dealing with right out of the gate. And that's far from it. On one hand, when she does overcome her initial foes, she's practically won her campaign. She does have a good climate situation: wasteland, mountain, jungle, savanna, and desert. So she actually has the best climate of all of the Tomb Kings, and that means she can really work in the entirety of the Darklands, because having both mountain and wasteland does wonders for her campaign. So that's a good situation from a climate perspective. On top of that, faction effect-wise, she gets 10 diplomatic relations with all factions, and because of the neutrality of Tomb Kings, that is a bigger benefit than you might think. She's in a relatively safe position. She can play the diplomacy game fairly well, which is one of the bigger benefits of Tomb Kings. She gets far more powerful archers than anyone else in all her armies, armor piercing especially being important. Tomb King archers can leave something to be desired, but hers are just that much stronger. She starts a war with the Sisterhood, so basically Neferata. That's not really relevant. She gets a 15 research rate, which is pretty nice for the Tomb Kings, for control in all provinces. Her starring army does include a catapult and a bone giant, as well as a lich priest with Nehekhara magic. Not the best magic. She's weirdly enough not necessarily that competent herself in battle. Like, she's got this huge focus on archers, and she's not actually an archer herself, which is just, a bit odd, I have to say. She's not great in melee either. Like, you look at Arkhan. Arkhan and Khatep are casters. Settra is melee and really good at melee. Khalida is kind of cosplaying as a melee character, but really she should be is an archer. She does get immunity to mountain and swamp attrition, corruption in a local province, and poison attacks for her entire army, which makes her archers even stronger. She does get an Serpent as a mount, but again, just not the best in the world. She has an ambush benefit, missile strength for archers and sepulchre stalkers, blessing of Asaph with true blessing of Asaph, which you might think, oh, isn't that redundant because of poison? Kind of. Keep in mind with allied recruitment and all that. She does get attrition minus 25% from all attrition. Unit capacity for skeletal archers, recruit rank, ammunition, 20% faction-wide, pretty big deal. Legionary barrage. Immune to contact effects, melee attack, melee defense for Sepulchre Stalkers and Acropolis Knights, and then Unbreakable, which is, I mean, it's not a bad benefit considering how things work, but let me put it like this. Generally speaking, if your lord is losing leadership, you kind of want to get them away. Now, with mortal lords, obviously, they would just retreat, very rarely. With undead lords, they would just disintegrate. I'm not quite sure if Unbreakable is necessarily the biggest benefit, but that is just my perspective. Still, it's matched with Frenzy and physical resistance, so it ends up being useful. Okay, so some pretty good benefits. Kind of lack of personal combat artillery. I mean, not everyone can ride an artillery piece as a mount, but weird starting dynamic over here, the way she's facing south, but you really want to go north. That's one of the problems that Khalida does have in her campaign. Another thing to be said about her campaign is the Books on Nagash. Again, like others, she does have that problem of having Books on Nagash in settlements of factions that she would want to ally or vassalize, because you can, like, if you don't have to fight Forik in this campaign from a diplomacy standpoint. He might not particularly like you, but there are bigger fish to fry. I mean, literally, Forik will always take care of Garoon, then there's Skarbranton, or who do you think he hates more? But the problem is, reasonably speaking, you play diplomacy, but there's a Book of Nagash in the last plateau that you can only gain by conquering it, and that means a lot of turns going through the mountains. This stretch of territory is gonna waste several turns of your campaign, so that is not a great campaign dynamic for her to play. And the thing is, once you deal with that, and maybe Krokgar to an extent, you're free to do whatever you want. That doesn't mean it's a really good campaign. Sure, you don't have the horrible victory conditions that Khatep does have, but all the same, the situation in terms of winning the campaign, it just, yeah, it's kind of a campaign where you just have a lot of things given to you on, like, it's an annoying start, then you have everything on a silver platter, which annoying doesn't mean hard. Certain limitations does not make difficulty, but in this case, it's not even limitations, it's just sheer level of frustration. And it's not even like you can say, oh, this is just an easy campaign. No, but it's not necessarily an easy campaign. Though I think a lot of people have pushed the idea, oh, Khalida has a really hard campaign. You can avoid fighting Forik. A lot of people seem to not want to play diplomacy. I get it, it's busted, it's broken, all that, but it is a core feature of the game, and it's one that we've wanted for years from Creative Assembly. And it was one of the major redesigns of Warhammer 3, so not playing with diplomacy whatsoever is just weird to me personally. Regardless, good amount of power, just a frustrating and annoying campaign dynamic to deal with. Not a horrible campaign, but not really exciting. I think that's probably the best way for me to put it. Also, yeah, you have to conquer Khemri for your victory conditions, which I hate going against Settra personally. And in general, this entire campaign area leaves a lot to be desired, though Khalida is in the best situation to deal with all of this because all of the climate here is viable for her. So take your wins where you can get. At number 2, we have Arkhan the Black. He used to be the best legendary lord of the Tomb Kings. I do think he's still really good, and in some ways he has a complete joke of a campaign. Whereas Khalida has a weird start, Arkhan just wins the campaign by default, because he starts with an extra army capacity, as opposed to having to spend multiple turns of research in order to get that army capacity to make his campaign work. Not a great dynamic though, because it just means that this is a cakewalk of a campaign. You are stronger than the Bretonnian factions that surround you. Dwarves might give you an issue, but you can overwhelm them as well. It's a minor faction, it's not Forik. Forik might be scary to deal with when you have one army limit. When you have 2 armies and you can get free pretty quickly, reasonably so in a campaign, that is a very different situation. On top of that, you also have recruitment of certain undead units in this campaign exclusively, because you have the Grave Hill, which gives you 2 capacity for Crypt Ghouls, Dire Wolves, and Feral Bats. Not the best units in the world, but certainly better than just spamming Nehekaran warriors and archers early on from the few barracks you can get, which you still can get. You're not limited in that respect. You start with tier 2 settlements, so you can just start getting the open graves as soon as possible, and maybe just recruit those initial units and then destroy the building, get in Yolosapien, play that particular game if you do want to. You do have a Tomb Scorpion as a starting unit and a Tomb Prince. Not the best choices over there, but not the worst either. But you do have that benefit in your campaign. And then when we look at Arkhan himself, well, he does have Winds of Magic Power Reserve. He does get melee attack. His items are pretty solid, all things considered. Special skill line wise, Cascade of Souls, benefit local recruitment capacity. Not bad, but a bit redundant given Tomb Kings in general. And then he has a bunch of buffs, melee buffs. He has a melee skill line and a magical skill line. He gets benefits for those special units he can recruit faction-wide. He gets more hero capacity for Lich Priest and hero recruit rank. HP, recruit rank for those units, Winds of Magic Power, Reserve capacity. So, not the best skill line in the world, sure, but he's pretty solid as a Legendary Lord. It's just that starting army gives him a significant advantage. On top of that, he has a very safe starting position because he's on the coast and he's far away from any faction that might invade from the sea. The downside is building slots will be taken by ports, but you have a pretty good province right here, coast of Araby as well to conquer. You have a landmark that can give you Yolosapien in the Great Desert of Araby. You have a minor faction of Tomb Kings over here that you can take over. So it's a very, very easy campaign. It works. Not the strongest though, from my perspective, and I think it lacks any real meaningful challenge to it, even in the beginning. Like, say what you will about, Khatep may not have that challenge, but at least Khatep doesn't start with an extra army. You do start with an extra army in a safe position with extra units. That is a ridiculous level of early game power where Tomb Kings are their most vulnerable. Arkhan may not be best at building an empire and his confederation options are limited and he still has to play those same victory conditions, sure, but all the same, it is powerful, it is easy, and not really exciting either. Khalida is frustrating in the early game. Arkhan doesn't have an early game. He just wins the campaign by default, which some would argue that's even worse than Khalida. Depends on how you want to view it. I just think Khalida's campaign dynamics are just frustrating rather than interesting. By the way, Arkhan is strong, and he wins the campaign he plays from turn 1. You don't even have to go to war with opponents, just worth pointing out. It's beneficial if you do, but you can also play diplomacy, you can play other things. Bit weird, but really, Tomb Kings pre-patch really favored Arkhan. They still favor Arkhan quite a lot. It's just that Settra has a lot of benefits now. Finally, on number 1 is Settra the Imperishable, who does not serve, but instead he rules. Settra does have the hardest campaign of the Tomb Kings, with Scarbrand to the north, Malagor creating Numas as a settlement that if it gets raised, you can't reoccupy it without dealing with him, Manfred to the south, who's almost certainly going to declare war on you, as well as various other problems. However, Settra does have a Warsphinx as a starting unit, which is a very, very good unit to start with. Certainly the best starting unit out of all of the Tomb Kings. He gets a -1 turn construction time for buildings and 20 growth. And given the fact that Tomb King buildings overall take longer to construct than other races, that -1 turn construction time is a very substantial benefit. But on top of that, he also gets his trait of Great King of Nehekara, and then, of course, the Imperishable. The Imperishable is not necessarily that great of a trait right here. Just get a lot of money, increase your income from raiding and buildings, but also reducing your wound recovery time because he's Settra. And the Great King of Nehekara gives you 1 population surplus for newly captured settlements, 10% casualty replenishment, 1 local recruitment capacity. In terms of his skill line, He gets various benefits for Tomb Princes, Tomb Guards, and Chariots, as well as a good amount of combat benefit. I would say in terms of direct combat, Settra is the worst caster of the Tomb Kings, but he is the best melee fighter of the Tomb Kings when you're looking at it. Largely because he can ride a Cimmerian War Sphinx. That gives him a huge amount of power. He also gets extra control in his province's recruit rank for his army. Tomb Prince capacity, which is pretty useful. Tomb Guard capacity, melee attack, speed, charge bonus for his army, as well as perfect vigor when mounted on the Chariot of the Gods, if you're interested in using that. Personally, I generally speaking prefer to use the War Sphinx, just usually better. Settra is quite capable of holding his own against an entire army in combat. He also removes the attribute wounds, as do other Tomb Kings, of course. But yeah, he does have a huge amount of power available to him in his campaign. You're gonna have to work for it, but overall I'd say this is the best designed campaign for the Tomb Kings, at least in the early game. Later on, he does have climate issues because he doesn't have the same climate variety as other Legendary Lords do have. So that is a problem in terms of the long-term potential of a Tomb King campaign. But Tomb King campaigns, like many other campaigns, but especially Tomb Kings, you overcome the early game, the campaign is effectively over. Settra at least has an interesting early game with different choices, different possibilities for you to use. For instance, you could just march on Gorgazan and trade it to Skarbrand if you wanted to in order to get him off your back one way or another. There's different decisions right out of the gate in this campaign, and I think that makes it the best campaign of the Tomb Kings to play, and certainly in terms of construction benefits, it is significant. Just a shame about the climate situation. That's all I had to say. Questine here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications.